Thank you for watching. These are my thoughts and a summary of a debate that I watched. And ouch. There we go. I got my chair over the rug. This debate was between Nathaniel Jeansen, who works for Answers in Genesis and is a young Earth creationist, and Dr. Dennis Venema, who was a professor at a private Christian university. I think it was called Trinity. Trinity is the name of the university. The first one to present was Nathaniel Jeansen. He read Dr. Venema's book. That should be done. I've heard of people who clearly did not read the book of somebody they were supposed to be debating against. In Dr. Venema's book, he wrote that people who do not believe evolutionism are doing it for religious reasons only. In other words, it's scientifically solid, proven. But I haven't seen that proof. There's somebody named Todd that Dennis Venema thought had an honest approach to the subject, but I'm not impressed with Dr. Venema. Nathaniel Jeansen, he actually took the time to look at the other person's position. Let's see. And then Nathaniel Jeansen talked about how Darwin did use some scientific methods. You know, most creationists, at least ones I think the most highly of, do give Darwin credit for trying and having some degree of following the scientific method. Now, sometimes his conclusions don't logically follow from the evidence he finds. All the Galapagos finches, did they have one common finch ancestor? Of course, who's going to argue against that? The Bible definitely does not exclude that possibility. But then saying that proves that finches and the trees that they're eating have a common ancestor, that's not proven or not logically following from the evidence of the finches having different beaks. But Nathaniel Jeansen's book is called Replacing Darwin because we have new evidence now that we didn't have in the past. Is my head in the thing? Let's see. Yeah, I think my head should be in the picture there. Darwin knew nothing about deoxyribonucleic acid. The common belief back then was that the cells just had a bunch of goop in them. And it was not known back then how complex a human cell is. And so it's time to revisit Darwin's ideas and see if his ideas are plausible with the new data. One argument for evolutionism is we have transitional species. There's actually a distinct lack of transitional species, but even if they do find transitional species, would that prove evolutionism and God didn't do it? Or could it be that a designer can design things that look like they're transitional? Nathaniel Jeansen used military technology to make this point, and he did a very good job on this point. The United States Navy has big ships to take military firepower around the world, and it has tanks that get military firepower to a battle. But those two things can't go to where the other one is. Now, if a battle's close to shore and a naval vessel can bombard it with a cannon with enough range, and can send missiles, but there's a limit to how close the ship can get to a land battle. And the tank, unless, the battle is right next to the coast, a tank is not going to be helpful for a naval battle. The military has amphibious vehicles that can be in the water and can be on land. They were designed that way. The ship did not suddenly give birth without any designer or creator to an amphibious vehicle. One thing Nathaniel Jeansen pointed out is Darwin was correct in one way. One false idea that many believers in God had in the 1800s was a fixity of species. In other words, the species were fixed. They make no changes. When God made the animals, He made the brown bears and the black bears, and there's no possibility that those bears have a common ancestor. And that's a false doctrine, that the Bible does not say that there can't be any changes in the kinds that God created. So Darwin was correct to refute that false doctrine. But modern creationists are not hanging on to those false ideas and are accepting the scientific fact of speciation, sometimes misnamed microevolution. There can be changes that happen to things. Alright, so that's my summary of Nathaniel Jeansen's first presentation. Then Dennis Venema presented. He started off with, I wrote ad hominem here. I didn't write what the specific ad hominems were, but I don't lie. So he started off with some ad hominem attacks. Dennis, he insulted the intelligence of everybody watching it. Let's stick to the facts. If you've got a good case for what you're trying to say to us, then you don't need to do ad hominem attacks. He was eager to show pictures of his family and let us know he loves Jesus, and he goes hunting. He's not a tofu-eating atheist. So what? Those have absolutely nothing to do with the subject at hand and were an insult to my intelligence and a waste of my time to see. And a waste of your time if you've got a time limit on making a presentation to me. One of the things he talked about is that he gave a talk, Why I Am an Evolutionary Creationist, to his classroom. If he's a professor of sciences and not a professor of theology and it was a science class, that's inappropriate. Even at a Christian university, it might not be violating some kind of prohibition of government-supported religion as a private university, but still inappropriate in the science classroom. You should stick to the science. He gave credit to Nathaniel Jeansen for exploring creation. That was good. He said something about science being an acceptable activity, insinuating that Nathaniel Jeansen or others don't participate in science or don't engage in science, but Nathaniel Jeansen does engage in science. He is a scientist in every sense of the word, and he scientifically looks at things. They did quote the same author, but let's see, sometimes. And Dr. Dennis Venema pointed out there was a scientific explosion around in the 1700s, but he didn't give credit to what the beliefs were of the people at that time. It was creationists that were trying to understand God that had the scientific explosion. He talked about languages changing. Okay, it is a scientific fact, it's a historical fact that languages change. I'm a native English speaker. I use slightly different words than English people in England and English-speaking people in Australia. But that's not a persuasive argument on this subject. Languages do change. Somebody would need special training in Old English to be able to look at, some of the oldest Old English manuscripts and read them and understand them. But that has nothing to do with DNA changing. Because language changing is, there's intelligence and a mind behind it, and people are going to communicate. That's what language is. And so if people are going to make sure they can communicate, they're going to come up with communication. And that's why, even though languages change, they're never going to die off. Languages do die off when a very small number of people speaks the language, and then that small number of people dies. But languages, they keep changing, but DNA, when it changes too much, things die. DNA is complicated, very detailed, very large amounts of information that tell our bodies how to work, tell our bodies what shape to be, how to react to different foods, how to process foods. And those things, if you have too many changes, it's going to destroy the thing. It's going to cause death. Genetic mutations do not build new body parts. It's never been witnessed. We've seen body parts go away, like the blind cave fish and the blind cave crawdads, but those things are blind. They lost something. They did not gain something. So genetic mutations do not do what Dennis Venema was accusing them of doing here. Whale, he was eager to point out that in whale embryos, they have legs and as part of their development. When all life is growing in their eggs and in the wombs of the mothers for bearing, live-bearing animals, where there's an umbilical cord to the into the mother's uterus. There may be some weird things. They don't, start out from day one looking fully like what they are going to end up as. But that does not mean that there were legs in those things, or gills in people. You should not judge. It's bad logic to judge what something is when it's in the middle of construction. A lot of buildings and cars, in the middle of the construction, guns, what other things, a lot of things. In the middle of being constructed, they are going to look very different than what they end up as. So you shouldn't say, well, this metal bar in the gun factory doesn't have a hole in it. It's obviously a club. No, it wasn't done being built yet. A car that has no wheels, that was first a boat. They planned to make a boat. And then, after hundreds of thousands of years of random changes, decided it was going to be a car. Or, no, it was always going to be a car. Just because it doesn't have wheels as part of the construction process of a car does not mean that a boat designer designed a boat and they are following the boat designer's design. One thing that the Bible is crystal clear on is humans are a separate creation from the animals. That is clear. If somebody wants to believe that God made a wolf give birth to the first whale, hey, feel free. The Bible's not clear about how God did it, but it's clear that God did it. And I don't see how you can squeeze God into the atheist creation myth. But Feel free if you want to. Dennis Venema said, we have DNA, so there's no wiggle room about evolutionism. That's stupid. No, DNA does not prove anything of the sort. There is a creator. Actually, DNA is good proof that there's a creator. Things are more complex now that we know about DNA. So that's, yeah, similarities can be created. Unless you agree with Bat Dad, who has appeared on my channel, and he gave the phylogeny challenge. If you cannot, explain whether the Toyota Camry and the Ford Focus or whichever cars it was Bat Dad used, if you can't explain how they're related, then there is no car factory, and those cars evolved. Because similarity, apparently, according to Dennis Venema, similarity has to have evolved and could not be created that way. So DNA, yeah. This is bad logic to say, wow, there's little parts here we didn't know about before. That means it had to have happened by random chance. If you live out in the middle of nowhere in a hut and you go to a big city for the first time and you see this big building and you think, wow, that's huge. That must have been created by a person because we don't have those where I'm from. That's good logic. When you get close to it and you see there's smaller parts to it, or if you talk to somebody who made it, or you get inside and you see smaller parts to the building, does that disprove the original premise? No, it's even more solid of a proof because a lot of little parts don't come together to build something. And what we see with DNA is when something dies, that moment it dies, all of the DNA that is needed for that thing to exist is there, but something is not holding it together, and it rots. We never see something die and then spontaneously come back to life, but all the DNA is there for it. Pseudogenes not used by creationists because creator could be created. Okay. That way, yeah. Pseudogenes are genes that right now we don't know what they're used for, or they look to geneticists to study them like they aren't being used. God could have created things that way, and we don't have perfect knowledge of every single piece of DNA, so there's room for improvement. Dr. Venema bragged about how he read 1600s apologetics to see what it was like. Why not read modern creationist stuff? He sounds like he does more reading of that than modern creationist things who he's debating. And in the 1600s, they were trying to prove geocentrism, which is nowhere in the Bible, and so it's not a good comparison between geocentrism and modern creation. The geocentrists were advocating for something that is not in the Bible, that there was not good proof of. Modern creationists are arguing for what the Bible actually says, that there is good proof of. Alright, they had a lunch break, and then when they came back from the lunch break, they'd switch the orders of who was talking. This is 4.5 hours long, and I think I'm going to be able to fit my summary onto this 1 hour long memory card. He tells his students that they are lucky to be here on this earth when the church is going through these debates and wrestling with these issues. And I don't see what's so lucky about that, or why students should feel that way. In fact, if he's saying that to students because they are demanding scientific facts that are tried and true and tested and have lasted, that's a good thing on the student's part. You see, there's nothing wrong with a student at university, especially if he is in a science classroom, wanting to learn scientific facts and scientific laws, and not wanting to hear some story that's going to change in 5 years. You know, great example of things that don't change. Gregor Mendel's experiments have never been disproven. That is a scientific fact, what Gregor Mendel did. That's what his students want, or the ones that that are thinking like I would be thinking, which I think might be the students he's trying to get excited about his classroom with the comment that he made about what he made to his comments he makes to his students. So he said the scriptures are silent on God creating or the creation. No, they are not. The scriptures are crystal clear. God made this earth for us. He made humans as a special creation. They are crystal clear about that. He was talking about the languages, but a language system that changes is still a language. So it's not a good comparison with DNA. He liked to talk about populations change, not individuals. Really? That's stupid or dishonest. Okay, so supposedly we don't get evolution unless we have thousands of things. And that's why there's not one literal Adam and Eve according to him. But by that logic, then evolution could have never happened because it started out with nothing. And then the first cell spontaneously happened. But how would changes happen in, you know, if suppose you have 10,000 apes, and then some of them become humans. How does that happen? Individuals have to make that change, don't they? Duh, yes. Populations are a whole bunch of individuals. And anytime something happens to a population, it happens to individuals. When there is a large number of people in a population that are drug addicts, that means individuals are being drug addicts, and somebody is adding up the total percentage or total number of the drug addicts. You can't have a population of drug addicts where no individuals are drug addicts. But according to according to Dennis Venema, I guess if there's a population of drug addicts, that doesn't mean that there is one drug addict in a group. The whole population is without individuals doing drugs. Let's see. Graph assumes evolution incomplete lineage sorting. Dennis had some graphs up. Let's see. Yeah, when he's sorting out lineages, he liked to draw these graphs of the clade that show how different things are related. And one of the theories he was saying is if there's a certain genetic marker in humans and gorillas, but not in chimpanzees, then that proves the common ancestor had both of those things. But not the common ancestor of the chimpanzee and the human, so that the human and the chimpanzees have a close and common ancestor, and humans, gorillas, and chimpanzees have one that's well further back. According to that, the first life apparently had all the DNA and all the information to build every kind of plant and animal, and somehow was only a single-cell organism that did not build all those other things. Bad logic there. Oh, and bad throat makes me need to drink some soda. Okay, not using mutation rates. Why? Don't match evolutionary belief. Science needs to be based on measurable. Okay. Dennis Venema does not use mutation rates to figure out things like how long ago things happened or things like that. But why not? He's got no good reason to not use those things. In fact, he shouldn't call himself a scientist. if he is not going to look for measurable things. Science is about knowing things. Some things we're never going to know without revelations from God, but science is about learning as much as humanly possible with the scientific method, with testing things, with observing what happens. And as technology advances, using technology to see things like DNA and see those little things, using technology to see the results of radiation, using technology to see things, but still, if you observe with a microscope, you're still observing and not just making up a story. And so science is supposed to be measuring things, trying to learn. You're not trying to learn if you don't measure, if you don't look for objective, where you can, objective, measurable things. And using mutation rates would be that. There's a certain rate that things mutate, we can find it, and there you go. Nathaniel Jeansen, I'm sorry. Dennis Venema accuses the Bible of teaching geocentrism. It does not teach geocentrism. Dennis Venema is... I've got no respect for this guy. He doesn't deserve any respect with some of these things he's done and said in this debate. Alright. There's a true principle out there. That there is a book of revelation from God and a book of nature. And we can learn from both of them. That's a true principle. God gave us this planet to live on, and the Bible is not an exhaustive teaching about all of life or diseases or the planets. There's things we can learn that aren't in the Bible. But truth will not contradict truth. And if you believe the Bible's true, then things that contradict it, you should not be believing. But Dennis Venema seemed to be quoting that principle as a way to claim that the thing he said next is true. Now, citing that true principle is not proof that what you're going to say next is true. Just like if I accurately quote the driving laws of some place, and then I say, you broke the law, that's not proof in and of itself that you broke the law, that I could quote the law. But this bugs me. Partly because it's the same logic I've heard used by others, specifically of my religion. I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and Joseph Smith or Brigham Young said something like, we believe in all truth. We love truth, and all truth is our religion. Some members of my church who are theistic evolutionists, I just repeated myself. But some of the members of my church will quote that one quote as if it proves that whatever they say next is true. No, that doesn't prove whatever you say next is true when you quote that one quote. It's possible for you to say things that are not true after quoting that quote that says, we believe in all truth. Alright, when Dennis Venema says there could not have only been two people at the beginning, he's contradicting the Bible. The Bible's clear about Adam and Eve, two people to start out with. But he's also contradicting the religion of evolutionism. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit excited. Because according to that religion, everything has one common ancestor that was a single-cell organism. So if we could start out with just one single-cell organism, then we could start out with just two people. Dennis Venema said science is not in the driver's seat or something like that. But for him, apparently it is. Alright, then Nathaniel Jeansen made his presentation. he pointed out that we know about 1% of what there is to be known about DNA. This is attacking the position that there's junk DNA or unused DNA, and that proves evolutionism, because there's that junk DNA from the past. But if you only know 1% of a language, you're not in a position to declare non-functional language. Yeah, until we have a perfect knowledge about all DNA, then you don't get to say, well, see, that's junk DNA, it's worthless, it's not being used. Really? Do we know? If you only know 1% of Russian, you can't go to Russia and say, wow, that guy was just mumbling some gibberish. That wasn't Russian, that was junk language. Let's see, Nathaniel Jeansen did contrast two extremes. There's an extreme position of... Let's see, which extremes was he? Well, Nathaniel Jeansen, as far as I can tell, strikes a happy medium. He believes the Bible's true, he also engages in science. But there are people who won't engage in science, that just want to have their nose stuck in the Bible. There are people who they don't really try to believe the Bible or learn from it, and want to find out what the latest scientific story is. Alright. The evidences that Dennis Venema was bringing up, Nathaniel Jeansen pointed out, don't differentiate between design and descent. Deoxyribonucleic acid can be designed that way. Similarities in design could be built that way by a designer. They do not prove descent. Nathaniel Jeansen engaged in science. He acted like the audience was intelligent and there to learn, and actually tried to explain things. Dennis Venema did not explain any proof of... He showed you his conclusions, but he didn't explain how his ideas were proven by the evidence he pointed out. Nathaniel Jeansen, I'm annoyed by people saying you need to make predictions because there are scientists who don't deal in reality. It's more important for your scientific theory to match up with what's actually happening. But maybe there's some usefulness in the idea about making predictions, because if you really do know what's going on, if you really understand it, you might be able to predict. But Nathaniel Jeansen, he made predictions about flood mutation rates, pre-flood, post-flood, and that matched up with his predictions when they've been tested are proving accurate. Nathaniel Jeansen refuted the stupid, bad accusation that if you say God did it, that stifles science. No, it doesn't. Giving God credit is in no way stops you from researching and finding out more. To the contradiction, saying junk DNA, useless DNA, vestiges, that is what stifles science. If you're proclaiming something's useless and doesn't do anything, if you say we don't know, we should find out, that's what gets you to, doing research and finding out. Nathaniel Jeansen pointed out that there are assumptions common to all of Dennis Venema's ringing phones. Hello? Yeah. Wasn't important. Oh, but my studio is so small, I can't just let the phone ring, it'll get in the way. Okay, now where was I? There are assumptions common to all of Dennis Venema's evidences. One of these assumptions is that mutations are the ultimate source of genetic variety, as opposed to a creator putting it there. 2, time scale of human origin is hundreds of thousands to millions of years. Yet Dennis Venema is operating under the assumption that things cannot be young, and are not young, and he's not going to even consider any evidence that would point that way. Let's see, young Earth creationism is a theory in the scientific sense of the word. In English, the word theory has a scientific definition and a colloquial or non-scientific definition. When the scientists use the word, and we really should try to use this word more often and not misuse the word in colloquial language, in everyday language, but a theory in science is not just an idea. A theory in science is an idea that started out as a hypothesis that has been tested, and the testing proves it true, at least sometimes. The testing supports the hypothesis. Young Earth creationism has ideas that have been tested, that have matched the testing. There is evidence supporting it. Whereas evolutionism, no, the more we learn about it, the less plausible or possible it's proving to be. It's more of a hypothesis. Now, theory, when non-scientists are using the word theory, they might just mean an idea. But that's not, we shouldn't use the word that way. That's what an hypothesis is. Okay, now they did a question and answer session to finish off their debate. Dennis Venema quoted a man named Todd who won't read Nathaniel Jeansen's papers. Wow, so he really likes this one guy, but this guy he likes to quote isn't going to get the full picture, isn't going to read another scientist's papers. That makes him not a good source of ideas or information. Nathaniel Jeansen, in the question and answer session, described young Earth creationists doing science to find out what the different kinds are. That is one thing that there's room to improve on our understanding of, is the kind idea, the young Earth creationist model, is not that there's a common ancestor for all life, but that the kinds of animals have a common ancestor. And more research, there's room for more research to figure out if, like, cows and goats have a common ancestor. Domestic sheep and domestic goats can be interbred. So perhaps sheep and goat had a common ancestor. That has absolutely, if they did, and believing that they might have had a common ancestor in no way proves or can be used to accuse us of not being scientific or being inconsistent if we say that does not mean that they had a common ancestor with a whale or a fish. But research is being done to figure out, how far down these trees go, what the common kind were at the beginning. Yeah, one of them in the question and answer session said science. No, Dennis Venema said science doesn't care where ideas come from. Dennis seems to care where ideas come from. There are some scientists who won't consider an idea if it was put forth by a creationist. There are definitely some scientists who do care where ideas come from and have prejudices that affect how they do things and what they do and who they will read and things like that. So that is my summary of this debate, where Nathaniel Jeansen definitely won. Nathaniel Jeansen treated the audience like they were intelligent. Nathaniel Jeansen explained things and had good logic, but Dennis Venema never proved anything. Tried to get the audience emotionally attached to him by talking about things unrelated to the subject at hand. You have a good day.